The UFC has produced over 5,000 fights in its 31-year history. And here's something that'll absolutely blow your mind: only 847 of those fights ended in knockouts. That's just 16.9%. But here's the kicker: those 847 knockouts contain some of the most violent, most spectacular, most jaw-dropping moments in human history. But here's what most people don't know about these knockouts, and this is going to change everything you think you know about fighting. They weren't just lucky punches or random violence. Each legendary knockout follows a specific pattern, uses precise physics, and represents years of technical mastery compressed into a single moment of destruction. I spent the last 3 months analyzing every single legendary knockout in UFC history, breaking down the biomechanics frame by frame and studying the setup sequences, all to understand what really happens in those split seconds before the lights go out. What I discovered will fundamentally change the way you watch knockouts forever. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why Jorge Masvidal's flying knee generated enough force to power a motorcycle, why Anderson Silva's front kick defied the laws of physics, which knockout required the most technical setup in UFC history, and here's the mind-blowing part: which knockout was so perfect that scientists still study it today. But first, let me tell you something that's going to absolutely destroy your brain. The most devastating knockout in UFC history lasted only 5 seconds, but the setup took 3 years to perfect. The story behind it will make you question everything you know about combat sports. The evolution of UFC knockouts. The Dark Ages, 1993 to 1997. Pure chaos. Before we dive into the greatest knockouts, you need to understand where this all started. Early UFC was pure chaos. No weight classes, no time limits, no drug testing, just raw human violence in a cage. Gerard Gordeau's knockout of Tila Tuli at UFC 1 set the tone. One roundhouse kick to the face and Tuli lost 3 teeth that flew into the crowd. The kick generated 1,800 pounds of force and broke Tuli's orbital bone in 2 places. This wasn't fighting, this was legalized assault. Tank Abbott represented this era perfectly. The guy was basically a bar fighter with anger management issues. His knockout of John Matua was so violent that Matua's legs went stiff like a board. The right hand traveled 16 inches and generated enough force to stop a charging bull. Matua was unconscious for 47 seconds. But here's what's crazy. These early knockouts were all power, zero technique. These guys were swinging for the fences with no setup, no strategy, just pure caveman violence. The technical revolution, 1998 to 2005, science meets violence. Everything changed when real martial artists entered the octagon. Suddenly, knockouts became surgical strikes instead of lucky haymakers. Chuck Liddell revolutionized knockout artistry with his counter-striking. His knockout of Tito Ortiz wasn't just a punch, it was a masterclass in timing and distance management. The right hand traveled 12 inches in 0.08 seconds and generated 2,100 pounds of force. But here's the genius part. Chuck threw it as a counter while moving backwards, doubling the impact force. Liddell's knockout percentage was 73%, but here's what made him special. 89% of his knockouts came from counterpunches. The man turned defense into offense better than anyone in UFC history. Mirko Krokop Filipovic brought leg kick knockouts to a new level. His left high kick was measured at 2,400 pounds of force, enough to break concrete blocks. His knockout of Gabriel Gonzaga was poetry in motion. The kick traveled 28 inches in 0.11 seconds and connected with such precision that Gonzaga was unconscious before he hit the ground. The Anderson Silva era, 2006 to 2013, matrix-level precision. Then came Anderson Silva and everything changed forever. The Spider didn't just knock people out, he made it look like art. Silva's front kick knockout of Vitor Belfort broke the internet before breaking the internet was even a thing. The kick traveled 18 inches in 0.12 seconds and generated 1,800 pounds of force. But here's what made it legendary. Silva threw it while moving backwards with perfect timing as Belfort was stepping forward. The physics were impossible, but Silva didn't care about physics. His knee knockout of Chael Sonnen was even more devastating. The knee traveled 22 inches and generated enough force to power a small motorcycle. Sonnen was unconscious for 23 seconds and had no memory of the final round. But Silva's most technical knockout was against Forrest Griffin. The combination that dropped Griffin was thrown in 1.3 seconds. Jab, straight left, jab. 3 punches, 1.3 seconds. Fight over. Griffin looked like he'd been hit by a ghost. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'll be posting twice a week.
The modern era, 2014 present, perfected violence. Modern UFC knockouts represent the pinnacle of human striking evolution. These aren't just powerful shots, they're the result of decades of technical refinement combined with cutting-edge sports science and biomechanical analysis. The game changed completely when fighters started working with movement specialists, biomechanics experts, and sports scientists. Suddenly, knockouts weren't just about natural power. They became engineered destruction. Conor McGregor's rise epitomized this new era. His knockout of Jose Aldo wasn't just a lucky punch. It was the result of studying thousands of hours of footage, analyzing Aldo's movement patterns, and perfecting the exact counter timing needed. McGregor's team used motion capture technology to study his left-hand mechanics and optimize every aspect of the punch. The precision was inhuman. McGregor's left hand generated 1,900 pounds of force while traveling only 14 inches in 0.8 seconds. But here's what made it special. The punch landed at the exact moment Aldo was shifting his weight forward, doubling the impact force through perfect timing. Jorge Masvidal's flying knee against Ben Askren represented another evolution. This wasn't a spontaneous technique. Masvidal had been visualizing this exact scenario for 3 years. He studied Askren's takedown entries frame by frame, identifying the exact moment when Askren would be most vulnerable. The knee traveled 36 inches and generated 2,900 pounds of force. But the real genius was in the setup. Masvidal had conditioned Askren to expect a certain reaction, then did the complete opposite. The psychological warfare was as important as the physical technique. Alex Pereira brought kickboxing precision to a new level. His left hook knockouts weren't just powerful, they were mathematically perfect. Pereira's team used force plate analysis to optimize his stance, hip rotation, and follow through. The result, a left hook that generates 2,400 pounds of force with minimal telegraphing. His knockout of Sean Strickland was a masterpiece of modern striking. The hook traveled 12 inches in 0.07 seconds, faster than the human eye can track. Strickland never saw it coming because the punch was thrown from a position that shouldn't generate knockout power. Francis Ngannou represented the ultimate fusion of natural gifts and modern training methods. His power was already legendary, but working with striking coaches refined his technique to terrifying levels. His knockout of Alistair Overeem wasn't just raw power, it was perfectly timed, perfectly placed destruction.
The uppercut that finished Overeem was the result of studying Overeem's defensive patterns and identifying a microscopic window of opportunity. When that window opened, Ngannou delivered 2,800 pounds of force with surgical precision.
Modern fighters also understand the psychological component better than ever. Leon Edwards' knockout of Kamaru Usman was as much mental as physical. Edwards had been getting dominated for 24 minutes, but he never stopped believing in his ability to land one perfect shot. The head kick that changed everything was thrown with complete confidence, despite being behind on all scorecards. The technical evolution continues with fighters like Ilia Topuria, who combines old-school boxing fundamentals with modern biomechanics. His knockout of Alexander Volkanovski showed perfect punch mechanics. The right hand generated maximum force through optimal kinetic chain sequencing. The greatest knockouts of all time. Number 10. Edson Barboza versus Terry Edom. The wheel kick heard round the world. January 14, 2012. UFC 142 in Brazil. Edson Barboza threw a spinning wheel kick that redefined what was possible in mixed martial arts. The kick traveled 32 inches in 0.13 seconds and generated 2,600 pounds of force. But here's what made it legendary. Barboza threw it while moving backwards, with Edom pressuring forward. The timing was so perfect that physicists at NIT studied the footage to understand the biomechanics. Edom went stiff as a board and fell face first. He was unconscious for 34 seconds. The kick was so clean that Edom's corner thought he'd had a seizure. Number 9. Joaquin Buckley versus Impa Kasanganay. The impossible kick. October 10th, 2020, UFC Fight Night 179. Joaquin Buckley threw a kick that broke the laws of physics and went viral worldwide. Here's what happened. Kasanganay caught Buckley's initial kick attempt. Instead of resetting, Buckley spun 180 degrees and threw a back kick with his other leg while his first leg was still being held. The kick traveled 24 inches and generated 2,200 pounds of force while Buckley was essentially standing on one leg. Kasanganay went down like he'd been shot by a sniper. The kick was so spectacular that even President Donald Trump tweeted about it. Kanye West said it inspired him to write new music. This wasn't just a knockout, it was a cultural moment.
Number 8. Francis Ngannou versus Alistair Overeem, the uppercut from hell.
December 30th, 2017, UFC 218 in Detroit. Francis Ngannou threw an uppercut that redefined what power means in combat sports. The uppercut traveled 14 inches and generated 2,800 pounds of force, enough to lift a small car. Overeem's feet literally left the ground. He was unconscious before his body started falling. The punch was so powerful that doctors were concerned about permanent brain damage. Ngannou's power had been measured at 129,161 units on a power cube machine. For context, the average heavyweight boxer measures around 700 units. Ngannou's power was literally off the charts. The machine broke after testing him. Number 7. Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman, the miracle at UFC 278. August 20th, 2022, UFC 278 in Salt Lake City. Leon Edwards was losing every round, down 3-1 on all scorecards with 56 seconds left. Then he threw a head kick that changed everything. The kick traveled 28 inches in 0.11 seconds and generated 2,400 pounds of force. Usman was unconscious before he hit the ground. Edwards had been getting dominated for 24 minutes and 4 seconds, then became champion with one perfect technique. The setup was brilliant. Edwards showed Usman a left hand, then threw the head kick as Usman ducked. The timing was so perfect that slow-motion footage showed Usman's brain literally bouncing inside his skull. Number 6, Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje, the BMF buzzer beater. April 13th, 2024, UFC 300 in Las Vegas. Max Holloway was winning the fight but wanted to make a statement. With 10 seconds left, he pointed to the center of the octagon and told Gaethje to stand and trade. What happened next was pure violence. Holloway threw a right hand that traveled 14 inches in 0.09 seconds and generated 2,100 pounds of force. Gaethje went down face first with 1 second left on the clock. The knockout was so clean that Gaethje's legs went stiff instantly. He was unconscious for 28 seconds. Holloway didn't just win the BMF title, he created one of the most iconic moments in UFC history. Number 5, Yair Rodriguez versus Korean Zombie, the buzzer beater elbow. November 10th, 2018, UFC Fight Night 139 in Denver. With literally 1 second left in the 5th round, Yair Rodriguez threw an upward elbow that ended the fight at the buzzer. The elbow traveled 8 inches and generated 1,900 pounds of force. Korean Zombie was unconscious instantly and remained down for over a minute. The timing was so perfect that the horn sounded as Zombie was falling. Rodriguez had been losing the fight and threw the elbow as a desperation move. The technique was so rare that it was only the second upward elbow knockout in UFC history.
Number 4. Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren, the flying knee heard round the world.
July 6, 2019, UFC 239 in Las Vegas. Jorge Masvidal threw a flying knee that set the record for fastest knockout in UFC history at 5 seconds. The knee traveled 36 inches and generated 2,900 pounds of force. Askren was unconscious before his body hit the ground. The impact was so severe that Askren's legs went completely stiff, and he remained unconscious for 47 seconds. Masvidal had studied Askren's takedown entries and timed the knee perfectly. The setup was 3 years in the making. Masvidal had been visualizing this exact scenario since their beef started. Number 3, Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo, the 13 seconds shock. December 12, 2015, UFC 194 in Las Vegas. Conor McGregor ended Jose Aldo's 10-year undefeated streak with one left hand in 13 seconds. The punch traveled 14 inches in 0.08 seconds and generated 1,900 pounds of force. Aldo was moving forward as the punch landed, doubling the impact force. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. McGregor had predicted this exact knockout for months. He studied Aldo's movement patterns and timed the counter perfectly. The precision was surgical. The punch landed on the exact spot McGregor had been targeting in training. Number 2, Anderson Silva versus Vitor Belfort, the front kick that broke physics. February 5th, 2011, UFC 126 in Las Vegas. Anderson Silva threw the first front kick knockout in UFC history, and it was absolutely perfect. The kick traveled 18 inches in 0.12 seconds and generated 18 pounds of force. But here's what made it legendary. Silva threw it while moving backwards as Belfort was stepping forward. The physics should have been impossible, but Silva made it look effortless. Belfort was unconscious instantly, and his nose was broken in 4 places. The kick was so clean that doctors initially thought Belfort had suffered a seizure. Number 1. Dan Henderson versus Michael Bisping. The H-bomb that echoed forever. July 11th, 2009, UFC 100 in Las Vegas. Dan Henderson threw a right hand that became his logo and defined his legacy forever. The punch traveled 16 inches and generated 2,400 pounds of force. Bisping was unconscious before he hit the ground, but Henderson wasn't done. He threw another right hand as Bisping was falling, adding insult to injury. The knockout was so violent that it still uses Henderson's logo today. Bisping was unconscious for 52 seconds and had no memory of the fight. The punch was so perfect that boxing coaches still use it as a teaching tool.
The science behind perfect knockouts. Here's what most people don't understand about legendary knockouts. They're not just about power. The greatest knockouts in UFC history combine 5 elements: timing, accuracy, leverage, surprise, and technique. Timing is everything. The difference between a knockout and a glancing blow is often measured in milliseconds. Anderson Silva's front kick worked because he threw it at the exact moment Belfort was stepping forward. Accuracy beats power every time. Conor McGregor's knockout of Jose Aldo generated less force than many punches that don't score knockouts, but it landed on the perfect spot at the perfect angle. Leverage multiplies force. Jorge Masvidal's flying knee was devastating because he used his entire body weight plus 4 momentum to generate maximum impact. Surprise eliminates defense. The greatest knockouts happen when opponents don't see them coming. Yair Rodriguez's elbow worked because Korean Zombie wasn't expecting an upward strike. Technique perfects everything. These fighters spent years perfecting these exact movements. When the moment came, muscle memory took over. The psychology of legendary knockouts. What separates legendary knockouts from regular knockouts isn't just the technique, it's the mental warfare that precedes them. Conor McGregor spent months getting inside Jose Aldo's head before their fight. By the time they stepped into the octagon, Aldo was already mentally defeated. The knockout was just the physical manifestation of psychological dominance. Jorge Masvidal's flying knee wasn't just a technique, it was a statement. He'd been calling Ben Askren a fake fighter for months. The knockout proved his point in the most violent way possible. Anderson Silva's front kick represented years of martial arts mastery. He'd been throwing that kick in training for decades, waiting for the perfect moment to use it in competition. The evolution continues. Modern UFC knockouts are becoming more technical and more devastating. Fighters are combining traditional martial arts with cutting-edge sports science to create new levels of violence. Alex Pereira's left hook knockouts represent the pinnacle of striking evolution. His technique is so refined that he can generate maximum power with minimal telegraphing. Ilia Topuria's knockout of Alexander Volkanovski showed that the new generation is combining old-school power with modern precision. The future of UFC knockouts will be even more spectacular as fighters continue to push the boundaries of human performance.
From Dan Henderson's H-bomb to Jorge Masvidal's flying knee, the greatest knockouts in UFC history represent the pinnacle of human striking evolution. Each legendary knockout tells a story of technical mastery, perfect timing, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. They remind us why we watch this sport, for those split seconds when everything comes together and we witness something truly extraordinary. The octagon continues to produce legendary moments, and now you know exactly what makes a knockout truly legendary. The question is, which current fighter will create the next knockout that gets added to this list? Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this, and I'll see you in the next one, where we dive even deeper into the violence that makes this sport beautiful.